Matt Pietrek and Demerara Distillers. We have Shaun Caleb here. We have Sharon Sue Hang here. Really exciting to have two such knowledgeable figures from the rum world in one place at the same time. My name is Will Hookinga from Zavvi.co, and we're going to get started in just a minute. Before we do, I want to give you the lay of the land real quick. So on your right, you'll see a chat window over there. I know some of you are already saying hello. That's great to see. So feel free to pop in anytime. Tell us where you're watching from, what's on your mind. If you have a question at any point during the presentation, you'll want to enter that in the question box at the bottom of your screen. Matt, Shaun, and Sharon are going to save some time at the end for questions, so that's the best place to make sure we see them. And lastly, please share the event with friends. There's a share button at the top of your screen. You can click that and share the link on Facebook, Twitter, wherever your friends are hanging out, and invite them to come join us. So with all that said, I'm going to turn things over to Matt Pietrek right now, who you probably know from cocktailwonk.com. He's also the community envoy for WORSPA, which is partly what brought us all here together in the first place. So Matt, tell us a little bit about what we're going to be learning today.
Yes, thanks, Will. So my role here is as the WORSPA community envoy. If you're not familiar with WORSPA, it is the West Indies Rum and Spirits Producers Association. It's a group of rum producing countries that work collectively on things that benefit the rum industry as a whole. And when this COVID thing hit, I was chatting with Vaughn, the CEO of WORSPA, and we said, you know, lots of people are out there doing live streams and online and whatever. And I think this is a great opportunity to introduce the rum community to some of the people behind the brands. You know, like we love brand ambassadors and marketing people, but you know, like us rum nerds really want to see and meet and talk to the people who are making the rum. And so we've hatched a series of sessions bringing some of your favorite rum producers and the people who are actually making the rum. So we started out first with, we are starting out first with Demerara Distillers Ltd, who I'm very excited about. Actually visited DDL in Guyana back last September or October, I forget when, but visited DDL, saw the distillery, saw the aging warehouse, also spent quite a bit of time with Shaun and Sharon, interviewed them, and so it's great to see them again, you know, although remotely. So that's sort of a little bit background of what we're doing here and sort of my connection here. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Shaun and Sharon. Sharon, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your role at DDL?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone who is looking. My name is Sharon Suhan, and I'm El Dorado Master Blender. I've been at Demerara for over 20 years. And my role is ensuring that El Dorado is consistent and be the best rum in the world. Yes.
Okay. And so would some people would have say you're the master blender role?
Yes. That's why I introduced myself as the El Dorado Master Blender.
Oh, that's right. Okay, you're right. Okay, excellent. Sorry. Okay, and Shaun.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for the lead into this session and for hosting Demerara Distillers as the first among the WORSPA colleagues. Hi to everyone out in the audience who's looking at us. I'm Shaun Caleb, the Master Distiller for El Dorado. I've been with the company for 13 years, so not quite as long as Sharon, but hopefully I am able to make up in other ways by producing good enough rums that give her the joy to do what she does. So it's a pleasure, and I hope that during the conversation we get to talk a lot about what we do here at Demerara Distillers.
Yeah, this is great. I think since we only have an hour or so, let's jump right in and get some technical content. So let's start going through some slides.
All right, so I will take it first by talking through some of the technical aspects of our production program, and then Sharon will talk about our product. So without further ado, I think most persons would know where Demerara Distillers is located. We are in South America. The next slide, right? South America on that northern coast. So we are equatorial, we're South American, but we're also Caribbean. So our geography, our history, our people is very much a fusion of all of these influences. More specifically, the Demerara region where the rums are produced brings together all of these influences. And so today we focus a lot on the Demerara category of rums we produce. They're rums that are exclusively produced in this region, and they come exclusively from sugarcane substrates, which gives them their well-defined sugarcane aromas and flavors that Demerara rums are known for. To talk a bit about our process, starting first with the fermentation, I should say that every Guyanese kind of owes their history in coming to Guyana to sugar and by extension rum. And so for us, this is more than a process. This is also our history and our legacy. And we take great pride in preserving that history in all of our traditional processes, starting first with our molasses, all the way through to our fermentation. At the current time, most of our molasses comes from the local sugar estates, but there is a need at the moment to supplement with an occasional import of molasses, usually from Mexico, to ensure that there are sufficient volumes to meet our full production program. Whichever source of molasses we use, however, we're able to make the adjustments in our process to be able to come out with the same product at the end of the day. If I can tell you a bit about our fermentation process to start with. So right from the bat, we use standard dry yeast, so no specially cultured yeast. However, because of how the molasses that is locally sourced is cultivated and harvested, and also because of the natural environment, it has a bevy of wild yeast and spores that are naturally abundant and spread. Those participate in the fermentation process. So our fermentation beer is actually enriched not only because of the activity of the main dry yeast, but also because of all of the natural presence of these wild native yeast species that help to extend into various side reactions that produce a whole bevy of flavor producing components. The next slide, I just give a sampling of some of those. We have been able to actually, at one stage, isolate, well, not isolate, but identify as many as over 200 different flavor-inducing components. But on a consistent basis, we keep track of the main ones that are important for ensuring the consistency in the flavor profile of our product. And they range from the low boiling heads to the heavier alcohols and acids to the range of esters and aldehydes and ketones that are important for flavor. And some of those are listed there. So acetaldehyde, for example, is known to be typically pungent, fruity, a bit of a leafy green. So whenever in our product, we're looking for a hint of that affect, we can manipulate the amount of acetaldehyde that comes through. Same for the amount of acetal if we're looking for a green, but with a more of a woody, solventy affect. In terms of the esters, those...
Shaun, are those the notes like we would get from, say, a Port Morant distillate?
From all of the distillates.
Okay.
But it becomes a synergy between all of the different components that are present and the net effect on flavor. Usually for the lighter components, to be able to detect those flavors in a much more pronounced manner, we'd have to pretty much make the body light. Otherwise, competition from other components would tend to change the overall character of the rums. For example, we have a light rum that is noted for having a very fresh minty with a hint of coconut, a little bit of creamy white chocolate sort of notes. So this is a light rum, and to be able to produce that, we have to be able to isolate the specific components that contribute to those flavors in the right amount, and only those components. And those components all happen to be on the lighter end of the spectrum, those low boiling heads. So that's a case where if we want to have those effects come through a bit more organically, we kind of have to restrict to one portion of the chemistry of the congenit profile, as opposed to the heavier rums from the Port Morant, where we have a lot more flexibility. So we can introduce a lot more flavors and therefore go deeper in the spectrum of flavor components. All right. To tell you, for example, there's one of our heavy / medium body type of rum that has a pronounced almond aroma. And we have found that, there's a particular heavier aldehyde that contributes that flavor. So in that case, we extend the distillation profile to extract those components as well. So it's not just the lighter components, but also this particular component. And so on balance, then the rounded marzipan kind of sweet balance with almond comes together in a very lively way. All right, so there's a lot of flavor chemistry that we're able to play around with. And I think that there's an important point that needs to be made here. The way we distill, the rums are produced from distills directly with their full flavor profile. That's important because it means we have to have an understanding of what components contribute specifically to that particular flavor profile. And sometimes there are synergies between components. And so we have to be able to balance those different components in the right proportions to get it just right. It also means that we have a lot of flexibility. Our fermented beer, as I mentioned earlier, because it's so rich with hundreds, literally hundreds of components, it gives us sort of that library to choose from. And so that is why among our different stills, we are able to distill so many different marks of rum, because we are given the flexibility to select from a wide range those specific components that contribute the flavors we're looking for. To talk a bit more about the stills, so we have 9 different types of stills on our property, more than a dozen in terms of actual number of stills, but 9 different types. Some of the types of stills are replicated. So we have, for example, 2 Saval stills and 3 coffee stills, etc. As I mentioned just now, we very closely focus on the flavor and aromas, and we try to replicate the dominant profile in every batch of rum from every specific still, which means that each still has its own thumbprint, its own identity in terms of the product it produces. And by replicating that for each batch, it ensures that at the point where we get to blending, there's a lot more predictability. So for instance, if Sharon is looking for a blend of 3 rums, let's say 1 light, 1 medium bodied, 1 heavy, because there is that consistency in producing each of the 3 components, she has a lot more certainty and a lot more reliability that once she gets to blend, she's able to do so to replicate what she's looking for with a lot more degree of consistency. So that's important for us.
So Shaun, really quick question. You were talking about the stills and how they each have their own flavor profile, but as I understand it, you're pretty much using the same fermentation for all of them. You're not doing distinct fermentations for each of them. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. There is only one still that has its own fermentation process, and that's our Hyester process. We don't focus a lot on the Hyester process. So that typically takes 3 months, the entire process, from the point of allowing the beer to ferment, to allow the addition of the special acid mixture that then takes the esterification process to completion for another 6 weeks. And at the end of that, we are able to produce a Hyester product that is unique because it's sort of unimodal, where there's a very high presence of esters, but without a very long tail, as might be produced in other territories. So we're unique in that way. Save and except for that Hyester process, all of our other rums are fermented the same way. Same yeast, same process, same tanks. In fact, the stills are fed simultaneously. It's only that the production scheme that is utilized on each still creates a different flavor profile, and therefore the sensory impact of the product.
I suspect we'll come back to Hyester questions later, but keep going.
All right. So to talk through some of the stills that we have, I want to first highlight our heritage stills. The oldest and perhaps the most famous of them is our Port Moran double wooden pot still, which dates back to 1732. This today we believe is the oldest still that is still in operation. It's made entirely of wood, except for the gooseneck pipes that connect the 2 pots. And the process is fairly straightforward. So the liquid in each of the pots are heated by steam that is charged directly into the liquid to allow for for evaporation to take place. The vapor that is emitted is cooled and condensed on that overhead gooseneck pipe, which is made of copper. That copper is important for a couple of reasons. Apart from being useful in the condensation, it also helps to strip out a lot of the sulfur and the lighter components that may contribute flavors that we're not looking for. And it also accelerates the esterification process, which produces a lot more flavor components, those rich esters that we ascribe a lot of flavors to. Because of that repeated condensation, however, what that does is to force the entire distillation process to take a lot longer. So one batch for us can take up to 16 hours, as opposed to a continuous distillation process where an equivalent quantity would be distilled in less than 1 hour. The result of that, however, is that it allows for a much higher pressure of product to build up within the column. And as we say, a rising tide lifts all boats. So not only would the lighter components in that instance be eventually evaporated and over, but also some of the heavier components. The net effect is that the wood in combination with the condensation on the copper gooseneck helps to ensure that a much bigger body of product is produced. It's full-bodied with a wider range of heavier components that can be found in any of our continuous stills. But that's on the pot side. We also have a single wooden pot which operates on the same principle. And however, because it's a single pot and therefore a single batch process, it's not quite as heavy as the double wooden pot. Beyond the pot stills, we have column stills of various makes. Our most famous is the Enmore wooden column still. It's a 2-column still, first built in 1880 at Plantation Enmore. It was based on the original 1830 blueprint that was patented by Aeneas Coffee when coffee stills were first introduced back in Scotland. The difference here is that it's a continuously fed still, and therefore product is continuously produced from the columns. As a result, it doesn't rely on a buildup of vapor pressure as would the pot stills, and therefore there isn't as much of the heavier components that are filtered through into the final product. However, in addition to the wood, there are copper coils that are woven through each layer of the coffee stills. That copper helps to condense esters, help to produce more esters, and as a result, it produces a lot more delicate flavor and the aromatic spectrum of fruity and floral notes that really enhances the overall bouquet of the product. So in short, it's medium body, not as heavy as the pot, but with a lot more of those aromatic esters that we like. Beyond the wooden stills, we have a number of metal stills, starting first with our 4-column French Saval still, which was first installed at Plantation Iflot. This dates back to the...
How you said that, not the pronunciation. Most rum nerds have no idea how to say it.
Okay, so it's Iflot?
Yeah, Iflot, yes.
And so that 4-column still can be operated in various modes. So in the 18th century, there were a number of these stills on different plantations. Of course, many of those stills were decommissioned, but fortunately for us, 2 of them were kept in operation, and both ended up at Iflot at one stage. I mentioned that bit of history because although it's the same still, on the different plantations, they were operated differently. And so in the 1930s, in 1920s, when the operations were consolidated at Iflot with the Saval stills, an attempt was made to replicate stills, the products that were made on Saval stills on other estates, which meant that the Saval still was therefore operated in different ways to produce the products that would have been made using Saval stills on other estates. To give you an example, so one estate might produce a light rum with tropical green fruit note. And therefore, one would imagine that some rectification is involved in that process, in which case all 4 columns get used. Another estate might have utilized only 3 of those columns because perhaps the quality of rum they were looking for is different. If, for example, they're looking for a more medium body type rum with sweeter notes, so sugarcane, caramel, and notes along that spectrum, rectification might be less important. And so in that case, they may choose to operate only 3 of those columns, or maybe they had only 3 columns in that estate. Another estate, still might produce a more heavier type of rum with a very particular note. Let us say, for instance, I talked about formaldehyde and how it leads to that almond note. Perhaps the note that estate produced was dominant in that note because of how it was produced. Well, when all of this was moved to iFlut, there was an attempt to replicate the production of those various estates rums on this single still. It was a way of consolidating the operation to bring all of that history into one place. Of course, we at Demerara Distillers today have preserved that heritage. And so that French Saval still is today able to produce over 9 different types of rums, ranging from light rums to medium body to heavy rums, with a range of different flavor profiles, each of which harkens back to the particular rum that was produced on an estate that we have tried to replicate for almost for over a century. Finally, at Diamond Distillery, where of course Demerara Distillers is currently housed, the metal coffee stills were sort of indigenous to this plantation. Today we have 3 of them on our operations, all of which date back to the early 1900s. They're similar to the wooden coffee still, with the exception that they're made of copper. And this is because at the turn of the 20th century, it was so difficult to maintain wood. And of course, with all the learning that copper is useful as a distilling material because it conducts well, it takes part in esterification, and therefore really enhances the decay of the product. One could imagine that more and more stills began to be made of copper as opposed to wood. And so the same occurred here at the Diamond Distillery. And we have, of course, kept those stills. So today we are able to boast the rich bouquet that comes from the copper coffee stills. We have 3 of them in total. I can tell you a unique difference in how we operate them is that we recycle the bottoms of the rectified spirit back to that first column. What that does, apart from ensuring we extract as much alcohol as possible, is to also recycle a lot of the heavier components. All right, so they get, in a way, rectified twice. All right, most of the components get rectified on the first pass, but that 5–10% that would ordinarily not receive attention gets a second pass. And so overall, it really enriches the richness of that bouquet. And so when I think of El Dorado and the wide, complex range of flavors that we're able to offer to the consumers through our products, it's a function of the number of stills that we have. It's a function of the richness of our process, but it's also a function of how we distill. We distill to ensure the way the stills get the product maximizes the impact of flavor. And the coffee stills are a good example of one such strategy.